So let's say that we had an application that we were doing paging in. So we've all seen applications where you have a lot of data and you're looking at the first end results and the second end results and so on and so forth. So this is all hard coded. But let's think about if this was dynamic. So in this case, we've got a total of 13 items. Let's assume that we have 13 items. We're showing 5 items per page. We would have a pager where the user could click on either, hey, look, let me look at the first set of data, the second set of data, the third set of data. Now, we could think about what the HTML is going to look like for this page with some fixed HTML, but this is going to end up turning out to be dynamic because sometimes we might end up having 20 items, sometimes we might have 25 items, right? It all depends. So we could think about how we could end up generating this HTML dynamically, and there's not all that much that's going on here. I've got a pager. I'm basically looking at the individual pages using a little bit of Flexbox. Again, not all that beautiful. You could always end up modifying what the CSS looks like. But let's focus on how we would end up generating these links. So what we could do is that we could think of a method called generatePager. And generatePager, if you think about the data that it needs to have, really only needs to get a couple of different things, right? It's going to need to end up getting the total number of pages, whatever that is. It's going to need to get the items per page, and it's also going to need to get what the current page is that you're on. So we'll put in current. So one of the things we could do here is we could set this up in a way that says, hey, look, if you don't end up passing in the current page, we're going to want to set it to a value of 0. So in terms of indexing the pages, we're going to index them. JavaScript likes to index things at 0. That's going to make our life easier when we end up showing the particular items. But what we want to do is generate a structure that's going to make it easy to dynamically generate this type of HTML. So one thing we could do here, just starting out, we could say, if in fact current page, if you didn't pass the value in here, if it equals undefined, then we could end up setting it to 0. Again, assuming that that's what we want our logic to be. And we can just console log this out. So let's go in here. Let's call this. And we're going to do a console.log. And we're going to say generate pager. And let's use our example. Let's say that we have 15 total pages. Let's actually even we'll make it 14 total pages. Let me refresh this. I think I have this incorrect. This is going to be the total items. Total items that we have, the items per page. Let's say we've got 14 items. We've got 5 items per page. And we'll call it without a current value. And if we went to run this, we'll see that we end up getting the value 0. This ends up returning undefined. What we actually want to return is we want to return an array. So we're going to call this pages, and this is going to be an array. And what we want to do is we basically want to find the data for these particular links. And there's a little bit of calculations that we're going to have to do. One of them being, we're going to want to know the total number of pages that we have. So what are the total pages? The total pages are going to be the total items, and we're going to divide that by the items per page, right? And if this ends up giving us a remainder, right, we want to end up rounding this up. So we're going to take this result because we want to get an integer. So we're going to basically round this up. We could do that with this math.ceiling. We'll round this value up. And let's just look and see if this makes sense. So we'll console.log total pages. Let's comment out the current page. And here we'll see that we end up getting 3 pages total, which is what we have here. Again, we could test this out. What if we call this and we've got 16 pages? If it's 5 items per page, excuse me, if we have 16 items, we'd have 5, 5, and 1. We'd actually have 4 links, which we have here. Let's switch it back to 14. So here then, now the logic gets to be a little bit easier, because what we could actually do here is that now we know the number of pages, we could just write a little loop. And we could say, hey, we're going to let I equal 0, I less than the total pages, and we could say I plus plus. And what we could do is every time we end up going into this loop, we could end up pushing, and we'll end up creating an object. So the index for each of these, and this is the value that we would use for the data IDX, and we could eventually end up generating HTML for this, but we're going to break this down into two spots. We'll say the index is going to equal I. We could also, we're going to want to know whether or not it's the selected page, so we could go over here, and we could say, well, let's call it, yeah, we could call it selected or current, whatever we want to call it. We'll know that it's selected if the current page is equal to I. We also probably, so we don't want to do really many calculations here, even though the index is starting at 0, the text for the actual page, we want it to be one higher, so we could say this is going to be the text that we're going to show in our link, which is just going to be I plus 1. And now what we could do here is we could end up returning our pages. And if we look at this, we've got an array, and this would allow us pretty easily to generate this HTML, right? This would end up having the data IDX of 0, data IDX of 1, data IDX of 2. The first one is selected, and the text would be 1, 2, and 3. And just to show that we could end up doing this, if we decided to, let's say that we are not on the first page, we're on the second page. Remember, this is 0 based. So now if we pass in the current page, we could also call it the current index or something along those lines. Now we'll see that the second one ends up being selected, which makes it easy because then if we want to, we could have another method. And in this method, we could end up passing in our pages, and we would have some method that would, loop over pages to generate the HTML. But again, the idea here is to break up our business logic. So our business logic here is, hey, look, we have some number of items. We've got a number of items per page. We also might be on different pages as we're, clicking through this. So being able to generate this data and then using this data that we're generating, so then we could end up calling, generate HTML for pager, and this would end up getting past the pages. And again, I would leave this as an exercise. So one part of it would be coming up with the logic for this, really what we call this data structure, which is an array of these values. And the other part of the logic would be focused on generating the HTML for it.